I guess, the BN and the UP. How important is the CREATE project at Chicago to the efficient movement of ethanol through Chicago to your system and then on to the east?
Well, in general, it's critically important that we move seamlessly through Chicago, and to that end, we're doing as much joint connection, direct connection as possible with the Western carriers, and in fact, in some instances, have run through power that stays right with the train and carries it right to destinations.
So you continue to be fully supportive of the CREATE project then?
I'm not familiar specifically with the project, but yes.
Okay. You mentioned that 4% increase in the ethanol, if it would all move to east by CSX, et cetera, would be a 4% increase in your overall traffic, and you said that that's not much of a big deal, but a 4% increase at the margin, I'm an economist, so I'm interested in the margin, a 4% increase is still a substantial increase, especially in a capacity-constrained environment, and especially since that 4% is not going to be distributed throughout the entire system. Are there any places where you see bottlenecks in the overall transportation infrastructure that would have to be addressed in order to smoothly handle such an increase?
4% is a big deal. I would agree with that. 4% increase in traffic is very attractive to CSX, but again, yeah, relative to the overall scope of things and the capacity that's necessary specific to ethanol, we feel that we can handle that, and we couple that with the development of the infrastructure at destination, which does encourage train load quantities and fast unload of those trains. So when you couple those two, we haven't to date experienced bottlenecks in any situations, nor do we expect to as that develops.
Okay, thank you. There was some discussion of the coal stockpiles, and we were out visiting KCPL yesterday, and they were explaining to us how they've changed what they consider to be a safe stockpile to ensure that they have sufficient supplies in case of spikes in demand, and it was fairly significant. Do the utilities communicate to you when they have changes in their long-term plans with regard to what stockpiles they plan to hold? I mean, they've gone from 20 days to 40 and 50 days, and that's a substantial amount. They've gone from 13 trains a day to 19 trains a day to keep up their stockpiles. Do they let you know that this is their plan and therefore you should be making your plans to accommodate that?
I think the answer to that in general is yes. There is, of course, constant dialogue between us and our utility customers, and a lot of that dialogue involves expectations with respect to future deliveries. The utility, of course, doesn't always have perfect knowledge about what they're doing, and in some cases they're reluctant to reveal their full plans to us because it could hamper their ability to buy coal as cheaply as they might. In other words, they might not want to have it known that there was a big inventory build coming for fear that they would pay more for their coal. But in general, yes, there is good communication there, and probably some room for improvement, but pretty good.
In your chart, you showed basically almost a roller coaster view of the stockpiles being held by the utilities, and to some extent, I would suppose that would be due to excessive burn or higher rates of burn due to weather. But clearly, that wouldn't entirely be weather. Is this a reflection mostly of changes in their strategy for how much they want to hold in terms of stockpile?
I think that's probably the biggest single factor. I mean, you're exactly right that weather can play heavily into it. The relative price of coal versus natural gas can play into their burn decisions. Plant outages or maintenance could play into their burn decisions. If we're not doing everything correctly, that can affect the amount of coal that's delivered. But in general, I think it's a financial decision that's based partially on inventory carrying costs and partially on what the utilities expect future coal prices to be. If they expect coal prices to continue to fall, then they're often willing to let their inventories run down.
Okay. Norfolk Southern talked about the investment you're making in your coal car fleet. Is about half of your coal car fleet is company owned, and about half of it is owned by the utilities, the shippers?
That's correct.
Are you changing that ratio? You sort of suggested that there are a lot of benefits to having a fleet owned by you. Do you have any plans to increase the percentage owned by the coal car, the railroad?
We balance that. I mean, and looking looking at our system today, we think we've got a good balance on that. We've had some private cars from utilities come in the last 2 or 3 years, and some increase on that. But obviously we want to maintain some level to that, and it goes with our investment. I mean, obviously it's not cheap to buy those coal cars in those type quantities, and we're going to do that over a number of years. But we think we've got a good mix right now on percentage.
You mentioned the export market, and the export market seems to have been somewhat volatile in recent years. Do you have any short-term forecasts of what the export market for both met coal and other kinds of coal is going to be in the next year or two?
Well, I mean, I think the export market is one of the markets that's been in demand this year, and principally into Europe. And I just came from a conference a couple of weeks ago in New York where all of the major coal CEOs were there, and we had some consultants also in there too, predicting that, and they think that the export market is going to be strong, and we would agree with that.
And that's export mostly to Europe at this point, or?
Yeah, that's metallurgical coal,
Metallurgical coal to
mostly
Poland,
going into the Europe.
Okay. Your companies primarily, in terms of originating coal, originate from the Illinois, Appalachian region, and of course that's been tapped for some time now. We always talk about the Powder River Basin being America's Arabia with regard to coal, but that's probably less true in the in Appalachia, although your coal does have higher BTU value. Is there any concern about the long-term supply availabilities of eastern coal?
I mean, we always look at that in relation to the overall coal market, but it depends on what the utilities and looking at that market and what they're willing to buy. I think it's a function of price and the investment for the coal companies. So it's more of a question for them. Obviously, we've got an infrastructure in Central App, and we would obviously want that to continue. Although it's dwindled, some would predict a larger decline than in the past few years, and I've seen that over the past 4 or 5 years. They predicted a larger decline than actually happened, and I think part of that was because of price. So we would hope that would continue going forward, because obviously we've got the infrastructure in Central App to handle the coal right now.
So output and haulage of eastern coal has been higher than the Energy Information Administration had forecast.
That's correct, and other pundits too, as well as that. But we've seen the increases. Obviously, as I said in my remarks, we've seen increases from other areas, and principally the biggest increase has been Powder River Basin coal moving to the south.
Kansas City, you mentioned about these hearings being a good idea, and you encourage us to continue to hold them. And do you have any other ideas for the STB that we might do, or actions we might take that would be supportive of the nation's transportation, energy infrastructure, transportation movements, energy movements?
I don't know if it's more of what actions you should take. It's more what we'd like not to see is more regulation and more policies that may hamper the ability for us to do what we do best, which is to move trains, and operate the railroads. So I think any barriers that can be held down would be the best, at this time.
Of course, that's not our decision. We do what we're told.
Right.
Thank you. Doug?
Mr. Jenkins, you had a slide up that said that you mentioned that the percentage 77% of the coal delivered is for energy production. I'm assuming all the coal that's moved is for energy production, but the difference between the 77% and the 100% is export coal. Is that correct?
Yes. What I intended to say with the 77% was that was for electric power generation. So we don't include deliveries to a heating plant at a university, for example. That would be in the other part. Export would be in the other part. Coal to steel making would be in the other part. So the 77% is best to think of that as electric power plants generating commercial electric power.
You're talking about that little school down in Athens, I guess you're talking about.
Well, there's a few of those around, actually, where
Being
they...
from Tennessee.
University of Virginia is another example.
Right,
Yes,
right.
sir.
Mr. Smith, you were talking about the percentage of coal delivered. You have a huge blending operation. I think I may have seen a little piece of it at one time on a little fact-finding trip. What percentage of the coal that you actually deliver is blended coal?
And I'm not sure what you're talking about on the blending facility.
My understanding is you blend metallurgical coal. You take the metallurgical coal and
You're talking about Lambert's Point.
Lambert's Point,
which
yeah.
is export,
Yeah.
and that
Is that all? You don't blend any domestic deliveries. You only
No.
you
That-
only blend foreign bound product.
that's foreign bound and set by the coal suppliers that have that various qualities of metallurgical coal, making a blend for the furnaces in Europe,
In Europe.
which can be low vol coal, high vol coal, and mid vol.
And the customer
type coal.
determines.
And the customer determines that. They tell
What
us
that
that,
is.
and we have the capacity to do that because it's in cars.
Okay. Are you free to say what percentage of your total coal volume now? You may not be free to say this, but if you are, I would be interested in knowing, if you've said it before in public, what percentage of your coal that you're moving now is still under contract, old contracts that may be expiring soon, or is it mostly tariff rate traffic, or can you comment on that, or are you not free to do that?
And that I'm not. You
I
talk about
I see one of your lawyers in the audience. You better be careful.
Yeah, I know. You'll throw something at me if it.
Yeah.
I mean, most of what we move is under contract.
Most of what you move is under contract. Okay. And as those contracts expire and those prices move to market, I suspect that's something that is going to be happening in the near future.
Well, as any contract goes out, we're trying to price into the market. So.
Right. Do you have any feel for what the difference between the average maintenance cost on a non-rail line of track and a rail line of track would be? I make the assumption that on your particular railroad, you move through a lot of mountainous areas with a lot of curvy track and mountainous track, changing grades, etc. Different speeds at different times depending on the terrain. I would suspect that your track, to maintain that track in your part of the world, as opposed to maybe the western roads, which operate a lot of straight line track. Not all. I know that's true. Not all. Some people shaking their head. It's not straight line track, but you've got a lot of curvy track in your part of the world, and I was wondering if you had a feel for the difference between the maintenance cost of operating that line of track and the other line of track that's not exposed to the pounding of the coal traffic every day,
No, and
which I presume is the heaviest traffic you carry.
That's true, but I really don't have a feel for that, and our network would be very similar to CSX in the same terrain, just maybe on the other side of the mountain. But certainly when you have to look at working in those areas because there's limited access getting to some of that track, it is an issue. But I really don't have. I'm not the one to ask for the feel on what.
When you
that
come
cost
over to
would
the
be.
eastern side of the mountains through Roanoke and where else, or is it all? It's not all through Roanoke.
Yeah,
is it?
Roanoke. I mean, a lot of our south traffic's going to Roanoke or going over to Chattanooga that way, going into the southeast.
Down through
or
Kentucky and Tennessee.
going into the northeast, going through Portsmouth, coming out of Conway and those areas in Pennsylvania.
Do you do any export in the north? Do you export traffic out
Baltimore,
of the
we-
northeast or all?
We access the Baltimore terminal there of CNX.
And that's as far north as your export traffic goes.
Yeah, I mean,
Baltimore.
export principally is Baltimore and Lambert's Point, and Lambert's Point is the biggest.
The calculations that I've done or tried to do indicate to me that the on average revenue per ton mile for coal is the lowest revenue per ton mile that the railroads in general get. Is that correct? Would you agree with that?
I think that's true. I haven't looked at that, but I know that's looking at the AAR data, and as a general rule, that is true.
Okay. You talked about the facilities in the Northeast where you have a fairly, no, excuse me, it was you, Mr. Jenkins, was talking about, no, it was you, Mr. McNulty, that was talking about your unload facilities in the Northeast for ethanol. I presume that those facilities are relatively new.
Yes, two of the four just opened up this year, and the other two are relatively new. Albany is the
And
newest.
who paid for those?
Really, it's been a combination of private investment, and in one of the facilities, we actually have an investment in Albany, and we've had to make some track infrastructure improvements around those facilities as well.
But the
So it's a
other
combination.
facilities, the other four, and then the five that you said the last one's coming on, is a company that's neither the neither the ethanol producer or the railroad or the city or the port or anyone else. Some third party has come in and said, hey, we want to build this thing for you. We want to operate this for you. We'll build it, open it, operate it. All you got to do is drive your trains in here, and we're going to unload them, and that's it. Is that basically the way it works?
3 of them are that way, and 2 of them are they have oil interests as well. So they actually consume the ethanol as well as sell it to the open market through
Okay.
their facility.
Okay, so actually the gasoline companies are
Correct. On 2 of them.
oil companies that are going to do the blending process for the ethanol are actually
On 2 of the facilities, the other 3 are independent third-party operators, as you described.
independent investors. Okay. Let's see. I think that concludes my questions. You have any?
No, I have no more. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Before we do the next panel, panel 4, we're going to take about a 10-minute break. We encourage everyone to be back in about 10 minutes. Thank you very much. We are on panel 3. Panel 3, Coal Shippers and Utilities. We have with us today representatives from Western Coal Traffic League,